inspiring and thought-provoking. Now, I call upon Dr. Rashmi George to introduce our next speaker for the morning, Dr. Anjali Bhelande.
Thank you, Dr. Pearl. Uh, I'm extremely honored to introduce Dr. Anjali Bhelande. My association with Dr. Bhelande goes back to over 2 decades. Ma'am was my teacher, just as Dr. Kumi Vivaina was also my teacher. I've also had the privilege of working with Dr. Bhelande at RUSA College. I'm not sure if ma'am knows this, but for us students, she was our Maggie Tulliver with solid gumption. She was our George Eliot. Further, ma'am took us through the joys of Paradise Lost, Gulliver's Travels, Art of Living in Grammar, and of course, literary theory and criticism. Dr. Anjali Bhelande retired in August 2017 as Associate Professor of the Department of English at Ramnarayan Ruya College of Arts and Science. She put in 37 years of teaching and research. She's the author of 3 books: Self Beyond Self, Articulating Gender, and Lord of the Flies, a Stylistic Analysis. She has also published several well researched articles in national and international journals, edited all the works of the mystic Dada Governed. Dr. Bhelande has won the Shastri Indo-Canadian Graduate Award for doctoral research on Ethel Wilson in Canada in the year 1990, and then again in 1998, she won a Shastri Faculty Enhancement Fellowship for postdoctoral research on the Canadian poet P.K. Page. Dr. Bhelande was the founder and convener of the Center for Mindfulness and Wellbeing in RUSA College from 2013 to 2017. Her areas of interest are holistic education, stylistics, feminism, and spiritual philosophy. Most welcome to St. Xavier's College, ma'am. Um,
Shall I begin?
yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Rashmi, for that very warm introduction. And I thank Xavier's College and Pearl and the rector and everybody present for inviting me and for hopefully being mindful throughout the session, because I want to make it a little interactive, and I'm going to do a close reading of literary texts, mainly some Canadian texts, but I shall help you out with some PowerPoint displays of the text. But you will have to be really mindful, all of you, to be able to make the most of this session. So shall we begin by saying that Kumi has already laid out theoretical foundation of mindfulness, and I would request Rashmi to start the PowerPoint,
Yes,
because it will help us follow the discussion. Can we go to the next slide? This is just
yes.
The topic, inner explorations, and it is an Indian perspective that I'm going to offer you. And here is a good definition of mindfulness. It is a non-judgmental awareness. That's a key term there. Without judging either others or ourselves, we have to be aware of our bodily sensations. Somebody asked about Vipassana, that's what it begins with. Awareness of bodily sensations, the breath, your thoughts, your feelings, and so on and so forth. Okay, so with this as a guideline, can we go on to the next slide, which is an introduction to Ethel Wilson, the Canadian novelist. I did my doctorate on her, and she's a very sensitive, soulful writer. And though you may not have read her, I shall try and sum up the situation that is being contextualized in that in the quotes that follow. I hope it will make sense. Her writing and her background: she was born in South Africa, as you can see, and she was only 2 when she lost her mother. 7 years later, she lost her father. There was multiple migration in her case. She was sent back to England, and then from there, the family migrated to Canada, Vancouver in particular, which is in British Columbia. So a lot of her novels are set in beautiful British Columbia. And the themes are all ultimate questions such as life, death, coincidence, and self-inquiry, finding out who you are, your identity, and then also, as we said, a cosmic consciousness that emerges in her work. So with that introduction, I hope the dates are given 1888 to 1980. I went there in 1990. By then she was no more, but I did interact with some people who knew her. So the next slide, I'm plunging into some literary texts, okay? And this first one, the next slide, is from a novel called Swamp Angel. Now a little bit of background. It is, Rashmi, can you change the slide? I think it's still the same. It is about Maggie, another Maggie, not Tulliver this time, Maggie Lloyd. And she was married to Tom, but now after he passed away, she married again. She married Edward Wardo, who is a crass agent, estate agent. And the marriage is a failure. And he's quite a pain, so she cannot confront him. She feels it won't work. And so she quietly walks out on him without his knowledge. This is the context in which I'm offering you this first piece. And she runs away, actually. And she arrives in a beautiful village called Hope, which is really there in British Columbia. And there's a river by which she is seated in this particular situation. And you see a little bit about mindfulness in literature before we address these details. All writers, good writers particularly, are extremely mindful, okay? And they are mindful of their own inner self as well as the environment and the cosmos as a whole. And therefore they come up with such details. Look at the description here about the river and how she's seated there. It is the river Similkameen, which means dancing river, and she feels healed by the river as she thinks about her situation. This first excerpt is mainly description, and there is the rustling river, and there is this deer, which is observed so beautifully by the writer. Now, mindfulness is observation. It is keen observation. Are you following, or is there a disturbance somewhere? Okay. So you see, even in Vipassana, as somebody asked, it is observation of body sensations, observation of breath, because breath is a wonderful way of connecting mind with your innermost self. You see, when you are disturbed, your breath is disturbed, whether it's fear or anger or any other affliction, it is that which is disturbed. So it is said that if you regulate your breath, then your mind will also settle. Equanimity is not easy, but it becomes easier through the breath. That is why Vipassana is a very useful tool. But here is our Maggie by the river, and she's trying to come to terms with what she has done. She has guilt also within her. Now, before this, this is a long excerpt. I hope you have read it by now. And before it begins, the earlier page I will give you, it says time dissolved and space dissolved, and she was one. Where is this? Yes. She was one with with these woods, with the forest, okay? And then she was all but a child. So that only the children of, you have to be a child to enter the kingdom of joy, the Bible says. And so childhood is the state of innocence, and that is the state she arrives at, and nature definitely heals. And I want you to see how self-aware she is and how aware the writer is. The writer is aware of the scene she is painting, and it is very beautifully shown how the deer interacts with her. And then also the fact that she her fingers strayed and found a fine cone. See, body sensations in Vipassana, they say, watch your sensations. Is there a tingling in your fingers? Now here, she's actually practicing Vipassana by, feeling the cone. This is mindfulness. Who is mindful is a very important question. Who is aware? It is not your mind. There is a layer within you which is aware of your thoughts. Thoughts are not you. This is what Kumi also highlighted. Now, even at night when we sleep, you see, we may get up the next morning and narrate half a dream which we may remember, or we may say, I had a wonderful sleep yesterday, very nourishing, because there was not even a dream in it. And that is how you feel refreshed the next morning, recharged. Okay. Now, who is narrating this? There is something inside which is your true self, and that is actually mindful, if I may say so. It seems paradoxical, but there is something beyond the mind which is aware of thoughts and sensations. Okay, so here we have an example of a writer who is mindful of the scenery she is depicting. And the next slide, Rashmi, talks about self-inquiry. Here is a character, Maggie, who is full of guilt because she is sensitive, that she has walked out on Edward, and she is having an interior monologue. Rashmi, have you changed it? Yes, thanks. Now, you see, all soliloquies in plays are instances of mindfulness. Then all interior monologues are also a form of self-inquiry and therefore instances of mindfulness. Now, this particular passage is saying, I think you haven't changed it. It should begin with, have you changed it, Maggie? Rashmi? It should begin with, I can't help, yes.
Yeah, it was.
I'm sorry. Yes, you were at the right place.
Yeah,
Can you show me that? I can't help it, she told herself once again. This is Maggie talking to herself. I betrayed myself, I betrayed Tom, and so on, it goes on. And then later she says, he has been my executioner for what I did by marrying him, and we have been each other's executioners. This is actually passing judgment. But then it is, she has distanced herself from her crisis. And so there is some mindfulness involved here. It is not, judgment without, this is a kind of Viveka Buddhi, as we call it in India. Mine is always an Indian perspective. It is a higher mind which is reflecting on what has happened, what has transpired. I guess as she evolves, even that will drop. Even in the novel, it drops later on. She says, he is he and I am I. Okay. And she says, what does she say there? I am humiliated. I won't think of it. As Keats put it, to think is to be full of sorrow and leaden-eyed despair, is the line from Keats. He knew very well, even at that young age, that thinking can lead us into stories and also magnify the problem beyond proportions. And so she says, there's no good in it. Now, this is mindfulness. Something within her, not the mind, something within her has understood that too much of analysis leads to paralysis, like Hamlet saying to be or not to be, right? And not acting upon it. So this is growth, and the cruel, dangerous thought slid away and played by itself. So here is a wonderful instance of mindfulness, and we all go through it when we have had a tough situation to go through. And we will continue with our analysis of some other scenes from the same novel, Swamp Angel. The very title is paradoxical, angels rising from swamps. And to my Indian mind, that was like the lotus rising from muck. Okay, so it's a kind of transcendence rising above your negative situation. Can we have the next slide then? Is it making sense to all of you? I hope it is. Can we have the next slide then, which is another scene. Now in this novel, please pardon all the underlining. This is a PhD work that I did, and so I had to closely analyze every text. I have another copy which is without any markings for my own pleasure, but please bear with me, but it will help you locate what I am trying to draw your attention to. And here is a character called Nell. We are reading from I Sit on Top of My Little Mound. Okay, I know it's a little tiny, the writing, unless you have laptops to enlarge it. I'll read some of the things. Here is another character, Nell Severance. Severance, I think, is severing and detachment. And Nell is spiritually connected. She's senior to Maggie. They are friends. And there is a lot that she has learned, Maggie has learned from Nell, who is a circus artist. And she was in possession of Swamp Angel, which in the novel refers to a gun. She was a juggler who used to juggle that gun. Okay. And she's very attached to it. So for me, in this novel, it's a symbol of attachment. And here is Nell. Later on in the play, in the novel, she realizes that the gun comes in the way of her relationship with her daughter, who is jealous of that gun. She feels because of the gun, the mother did not give her enough time and attention. Okay, so she throws away the gun, and which is a kind of renunciation. And here, by the end of the novel, she says this. This is again an interior, a kind of monologue, and Maggie is present to listen to it. And she says, I sit on top of my little mound of years, and it is natural and reasonable that I should look back and I see the miraculous interweaving of creation, the everlasting web. And I see a stone and a word and this stub. Stub is a cigarette stub. Now look at this web metaphor here. Immediately I thought of the webs in Indian scriptures, the Vedas in particular. The web is always a symbol of interconnectedness in our literatures. And you see, this particular passage goes back to Passage to India, and Fielding really deeply influenced Ethel Wilson. And there is a scene there where Professor Godbole has this kind of cosmocentric vision. See how broad the vision is. And she is almost giving some lessons to Maggie there, because Maggie looks upon her as her spiritual mentor. And she's saying that the whole world is interconnected. I am linked with the stone, the word, and the stub. Now, Professor Godbole, there is a similar passage there, and he has a kind of revelatory moment where he feels connected with the cosmos. But when it comes to the stone, which is the inanimate world, okay, you are related to the animate as well as inanimate. And there he stops short. But Nell goes beyond that. And she says, for me, everything is interlinked. There is no point in blaming anybody for anything. and everybody is, no man is an island. She keeps quoting Dunn also, Ethel Wilson, no man is an island entire unto himself. And so just see the interesting things in her web. There is the stone, which is the inanimate world. Then there is a word, which is language, okay? And it may also stand for word W capital in the Bible, okay, which is the source. And also there is the cigarette stub, which to my mind was a symbol of negative tendencies. Smoking is injurious to health as well as to the environment. And all these she is able to accept. In life, there is the negative pole and the positive pole, and both are included, and all polarities have to be accepted, which is what she's suggesting to Maggie as well. And she says later on, I include the Chinese boy who is assisting Maggie. She has set up, she has a position in a log cabin later on. From hope, Maggie, revived and nourished, moves on to another place where there is a log cabin, and she cooks for the owner, and she also is assisted by a Chinese boy. So she manages to regulate her life again. But that regulation has not come through the mind. It has come through a moment of transcendence when there was no thought. And you see, she is that thing which watches, has understood something. And then when you understand something, it is not difficult to transform yourself. As Krishnamurti used to say, when you know you are holding poison in your hand or a hot brick in your hand, it is not a matter of time. You just drop it. So it is a matter of full understanding, total understanding of your wrong mind movements. Okay. So here is Nell, who has achieved that kind of transcendence, but not fully. She still has her flaws. And however, her understanding at the intellectual level is very deep here. And she says here that you have to accept life in its totality with its positive charge and its negative charge, and that ultimately life is a mystery. See, later on she says, is there coincidence? She says, life is very strange. It is stranger than fiction sometimes. And so she says, I have just a few convictions left, and I hope to die before I lose them. Because when you try to put faith into words, the words are hollow. So this whole dimension of mindfulness, it is not the thought domain. It is a domain beyond thought. And that is why stillness is valorized in all scriptures. Be still and know that I am God is what the Bible says. And all scriptures say it, okay? And we are the happiest when we have this sleep without dreams. We feel much better when we have slept well, because there you have withdrawn from the world. You are not there. The world is not there. There is only stillness, and it is so nourishing. So in the context of escalating suicides among students and people at large, it is very important to go into stillness, at least for a small part of the day. We are not saying be still all the time and don't use thought. All mystics have said thoughts for the working mind, thought is necessary to know your address and go home safely, but we use it in excess. Thought should be our servant. It has become our master. So mindfulness is about dissolving into that dimension from which all thought emerges, everything emerges. Okay. So I find this a very beautiful passage, and it also talks about coincidence somewhere in the same thing. And providence and coincidence are also questions that come up. I don't think it's here. And those are addressed in the novel as a whole. Okay, so that is another instance of mindfulness in literature, and it is sensitive readers who tune in and who are able to grasp the maximum out of it. But close reading of text is very important. Okay, so may I ask you to move on to the next slide, which is another example. Which one is that? Yes, this is very interesting. Just look at the underlined words. Since it's a long text and you can't read it, it's tiny. Let me read out to you. This is another novel called Hetty Novel, and there what is being described is the confluence of two rivers, and it says, perhaps the water was emerald, perhaps it was sapphire. This we see in many of our conferences. The color is different, the different rivers. So she's writing here about the Thompson River in British Columbia, and she says, perhaps the water was emerald, perhaps it was sapphire, it is both, it is neither. Now, this may be seen as a harmless description, but my Indian mind was immediately reminded of two things. One is the 2nd century AD philosopher, Buddhist philosopher called Nagarjuna, who has given us the text Madhyamika Karika, in which he has said that when you talk about the relative world or about people, you can only have these 4 options. They are called Chatushkoti. It is so, it is not so, it is both, it is neither. Now, why have I brought this up? Because in all her novels, not just here while describing the river and the confluence and its different colors, we find Ethel Wilson being very open and being aware of the implications of this quotation. It means that all knowledge is probable. It is never the ultimate truth. All knowledge is probable because it is from somebody's point of view, and all point of views are partial. They are your view, as Kumi also earlier pointed out. So you can never arrive at the total truth through logic and through language. These two fall inadequate. Okay. Now, therefore, if you want to know the ultimate truth about who is hurt, who am I, etc., you have to go to that dimension which is mindfulness, which is beyond thought, which is stillness, which is silence, which could be achieved through mantra, which could be achieved through yoga or any kind of contemplative practice. Okay, so this is something I discovered. And the other thing in this quotation is the word perhaps. Perhaps is a very humble way of putting it, saying that all that I am saying is tentative. If each one of us were to practice this mindfully, there would be no conflicts, there would be no wars, and everyone would be accommodating of the other, knowing that you are the other ultimately, which is what the next slide will show you. Can I, Rashmi, have the next slide, please? Which is now, which one is this one? Is it the avatar passage or I can't see? In the sequence, is it the avatar passage, Rashmi? Or
Yes, yes, there is an avatar. Her avatar tells
Yeah,
her.
Avatar tells her that, yeah, it is that one.
Right. So here is, this is the word which made me feel when I read Swamp Angel sitting in Mumbai. I felt there was an Indian component here. There was something Indian about this writer's vision. And so I went abroad with this hunch, and whoever I met kept saying, no, she had nothing to do with India. And there was a eureka moment in my research when I discovered that she had read the Bhagavad Gita. But that's another story. Here, when I asked about avatar, they said it's a common word in the English language now, doesn't necessarily mean anything. And I accepted that humbly, and I said, can I not at least look for parallels? Now, here is Maggie, who has now found a job, as I told you, as a cook. And she's almost like an Annapurna, a goddess who is generously serving food to all and sundry, and the visitors as well. And here she has a little break. She loves swimming in that lake. And now see how different her interior monologue is. This is, of course, the narrator telling us that her avatar tells her that she is one with her brothers, the seal and the porpoise. She feels this sense of oneness. Whereas in that earlier passage, when she was disturbed, she said, he is he and I am I. There was this separative consciousness. Now here, I am reminded of Patanjali, the sage Patanjali, who is 2nd century BC, who talks about afflictions. What causes misery and afflictions? As the root cause is always avidya or ignorance. What is this ignorance? It is spiritual ignorance. What does that mean? It means you don't know the truth about yourself and the world. You imagine yourself to be a separative consciousness. That is your first ignorance, which you are not. Quantum physics says that all energy is one, even if it manifests as different energies like magnetic energy or electric energy, where the vibrational frequency differs. But today there has been a paradigm shift in science itself, which says it all goes back to one source. So this feeling has to come through mindfulness. Until then, we keep living with this ignorance that I am the jiva, the separative, very contracted, self-centered consciousness, and I am not Shiva. Shiva is that cosmic consciousness. Now here we see our protagonist experiencing a kind of expansive consciousness where she is one with the seal, with the water, and then she goes on. It's a longish passage. I hope this will invite you and urge you to read Swamp Angel someday. It is such a beautiful text. And so she says, but her avatar had better warn her that she is not really seal or porpoise. Again, this is like Nagarjuna saying she is so, she is not so. Because on the relative plane, there is this play of illusion and reality. We do not know what we are, and we have shifting perspectives all the time. And then the second para, the water, that element that bears her up, there is a sentence there. Look at the red tick mark. But since she can swim, she swims strongly out into the lake, forgetting past and future. One feature of mindfulness is living in the present moment, and she's forgotten all her painful past. Even at the log cabin, it's not that life is rosy. There is the owner's wife who is jealous of her and makes trouble for her. And yet she chooses to go down to the lake and come to terms with her new situation. And also, throughout the novel, she talks about swimming around stones and boulders, just like water does not, it keeps flowing. Even if there's a boulder in it, it goes either around it or over it. So this is what our protagonist Maggie learns from nature. Okay, so this is because of her mindfulness. So this again is for me a case of mindfulness. Can we have the next slide, please? Since I must not.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. What is the next one, dear? It is
It's
next. This is my great eureka moment when I discovered that she had read Annie Besant's translation of the Bhagavad Gita. And that kind of validated my research. And then they started taking me quite seriously. They thought I was making sense, thank God. So, because the Western world wants proof, and I think all research wants proof, nothing wrong in that. So, I found this passage from another novel of hers, which is Innocent Traveler. In this book, there is a hypothetical situation where there is a world war, perhaps, and a woman is holding her young son who is dead in her arms, and she is mourning his death. And then we have the voice speaking from the field of battle had always, in the nature of things, been prepared to speak. Now, Canadian critics, being unaware of the Bhagavad Gita, had not really paid attention to this passage. This is why, an Indian perspective, I want to urge all of you to know that a different perspective may result in new findings and new meanings. Okay, so this passage was never really paid attention to by other critics. Now, of course, it is the voice of Krishna on the battlefield who is saying to Arjun that the unreal hath not no being, the real never ceases to be. The truth about both have been perceived by the seers of the essence of things. What Krishna is saying is that we are not our body and we are not our mind and we are not the doer. And so when Arjun does not want to fight and has a paralysis of will, it is Krishna who urges him. Now, here she is saying that this mother is ignorant of the fact that the soul is immortal, that the essence always remains, and that the child was already dead before it was born, which are not abstractions. This is what, again, science will tell you. All energy is constant and no energy can be lost. Okay, the law of conservation of energy. So this is a wonderful passage which saved the situation for me and allowed me to prove to the critics there that there was a connection. And see in the second para there, while these events onwards, I'll read out the permanence of the fleeting and prodigal joy of this timeless world was without responsibility or question. And the last line, the permanence of the impermanent flower is forever. So our writer Ethel Wilson is continuously pointing to something which is beyond time and space. And that is what Radhakrishnan had said once. The Bible says, love thy neighbor as thyself, because, as the Upanishads point out, you are that self. You are the other. Okay. So now this might again sound like an abstraction, but we are coming to the next scene. Can we go on to the next slide, which is about the birds, perhaps? Is it the birds? No, where is the bird passage? I am the bird.
Yeah, just a second, ma'am.
Okay.
Let me see. Yeah, is this the one? Can you just check?
Um,
Look out of the window at the living birds.
yes, yes. Um, Now, if you see there, that is another situation. Okay, I'll give you the context in which this is happening. There is the first person narrator, I, over there, who is talking, and she is saying that she has come to visit her sister because she's had a broken relationship, probably broke her engagement, and she is very, very miserable. And so she has come to her sister, hoping perhaps to get some kind of consolation or some kind of, empathy. And so it begins with the words, horrible, horrible do they live. What is she talking about? There is this situation where there are French windows, glass panes, on which birds come, and then sometimes they dash against the glass pane because they don't see them. They are badly injured and they hurt themselves. Okay. And then the gardener heals them. Now she says she suddenly notices the birds, and she said the marks on the glass pane, and asks her sister, what are these about? And the sister explains the whole thing, that the birds tend to get injured. And she has a revelatory moment listening to this. She says, I had bashed my head against the reality that was waiting for me invisible and had nearly broken my neck. So again, a natural happening becomes a kind of insight for this character. This is also mindfulness. Because of her mindfulness, she noticed the mark on the window pane, and then she got this explanation. And so she feels for those injured birds. And earlier on, what is underlined says, I was a bird and the birds were I. This is total involvement, total identification with the other. Love thy neighbor and thyself, because you are the other. So here is a character who becomes the bird almost. And this is like the Mahavakya in the Upanishads. Uh, that art thou. Okay, it's one of the aphorisms. The great aphorisms in the Upanishad says that you are that. Okay, you are not this contracted self which you think you are as a body mind, but a universal consciousness. Okay, and so you are one with nature, with people, with everything, and yet you are nothing, because you are beyond all polarities such as everything and nothing. So now quantum physics is saying the same thing. It has come up with holograms as a metaphor for, even brain cells. Every cell is aware of everything that is happening within the body, though its function may be specific to one area. So let me not get into too many philosophical statements. I hope you've got the point about literature helping you to be mindful by exposing you to people who are mindful, characters who are mindful, because one learns from example emulation. And if one is a sensitive, mindful reader, one takes away so much from every literary text. Okay, so now I want to talk about another writer, Patricia Faith. That was my postdoctoral work. And well, I think I did not complete the 5 kleshas. Kleshas are afflictions from Patanjali. He says the root cause is avidya, which is separative consciousness, and the feeling that you are limited, that you are not, you are finite, you are flawed, you are inadequate, and therefore you seek to fill that inadequacy through relationships or through possessions, right? So that is the basic cause. The other causes listed are asmita, which is pride or ego, then rag and dvesh. Rag is excessive attachment to something, and dvesh is revulsion. Your like, dislike symbols do that for you in your social media. And abhinivesh is the last one, which is fear of death due to excessive attachment to life. These are the 5 reasons why we suffer in life. And so to go beyond these afflictions, you have to know your true self, which is not this body mind. It is something very subtle, very pure, very childlike, and very perfect. Absolutely, we can't say very perfect, can't have degrees. It is absolutely flawless. Okay, so this is what sage Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras has said this in chapter 2, verse number 3, if anybody wants to explore further. Okay, so now I shall go to the last example because we are running out of time. It is a backwards journey. This is a beautiful poem by Patricia Page, who was very mystical, and one can actually have a program called Mindfulness Through Literature, taking Tukaram, taking Rumi, and all these mystical texts, if one is inclined to go that way. Over here, I must say that when I did my research in 1990, I was restless. I found that there was a sociological approach, there was a psychoanalytical approach, and historical approach, but there was no metaphysical approach to literature. And then post-structuralism came in. And then, they frowned upon transcendence as the ultimate peg on which to hang your coat. And they poo-pooed transcendence. Now, I had to say then in many a forum that their claim that there is no transcendence is also a transcendental claim. It's an absolute claim. So I have every right to stick to my position because naturally I am drawn to the transcendental dimension. And then I was very blessed to find writers who also had this a similar orientation. So I am closing with this last one, a backwards journey, which is a beautiful poem. The speaker is saying, when I was a child, I used to watch what does she say that? It is a can, the Dutch cleanser, like a Harpic, the Dutch cleanser, which my mother bought. It was a round container of yellow cardboard, and on which there was, it depicted the Dutch cleanser woman, the Dutch cleanser woman holding this can in her hand. So my childhood observation was very keen, and I used to watch it closely. And this is a kind of infinite regression she is depicting in the poem. She's watching that can on which there is a Dutch woman who is holding another can, and on that can there is another Dutch woman holding another can. You get the point. It is a case of mirror images, and this is going on that way. And this was no game, she says. The woman led me backwards. This is mindfulness. She led to the smallest point. I think I knew that if no one called and nothing broke the delicate jet of my attention, that tiny image could smash the atom of space and time. Now, this is absolute transcendence, The child, we are not saying she has achieved enlightenment, but this is like Tratak in yoga, where you concentrate on one point until the observer is dissolved. The subject and the object, you understand the duality. If you are positioned in the subject and you are watching an object, and if you watch with total presence and awareness, then the I, the viewer, the observer, the sakshi dissolves. And this is one advantage of mindfulness. Okay. So I think this will also give you a kind of ideas of the various possibilities that exist while studying literature, if you are interested in the ultimate questions of life. And maybe I should not go on about this, but give you a chance to interact with me now. Would you like to ask questions and tell me if you feel this has been worthwhile, that you can look at literature in fresh ways, because your webinar also covered alternative pedagogies. I thought I would bring in mindfulness as well as alternative Indian ways. Now, I do not want to problematize the term Indian as post-structuralists would do. Certainly, we are a product of our conditioning. And I did not have all these theories in mind way back in 1990. Later on, someone told me, your research is anti-colonial, you know. You have not taken the tools of Western theories, but I didn't set out to do that. There was no othering that I was talking about there. Okay, so thank you so much, Pearl and Rashmi and Xavier and Rashita and everybody who allowed me to present my point of view. Thank you so much. Any questions? Or has this been too overwhelming, too rapid, and too rushed?
No, I would like to say something, ma'am, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Okay, so I would just like to, when you were we read the last poem, I came across this post on Instagram which said that all the galaxies, at least the ones that we have covered by now, are moving. Obviously, the whole universe is moving, and they have started to take the shape which resembles pretty much a human body. So, so I just.
What is your question? It's wonderful. It's your imaginative mind which went into a kind of cosmic vision. This is what literature does. But then you have to be very careful here, because imagination is also the mind domain very often. You know, the observing self does not go into stories, imaginations. I'm not trying to belittle your vision. It may be very symbolic, but you have to be very careful, because the mind is a highly self-deceptive mechanism. And the voice in the head, which is what even Eckhart Tolle talks about, is not mindfulness. It is just one step towards mindfulness. Unless you are watching from a domain of stillness, you are not out of the mind. You know, to step out of the mind field, you need to silence all thought. So now, while I appreciate your imaginative reading skills, just be aware, ask yourself, am I talking, because where will you stop? Science says there are many universes and ever expanding universes too. So where will you end? At the macro level as well as at the micro level, this is still the relative field, whereas the mystics are talking about a timeless and spaceless dimension. Does that answer your question, I wonder? Yes?
Ma'am, that actually makes me come up with 100 more questions, but in a very good way.
Okay,
but I had like one more thing to say. Like, when you were talking about Indian philosophy, I myself am very much interested in Indian philosophy and whatever I can read. So I came across this Swamiji, or I don't know who, he's pretty renowned. I've forgotten his name. However, he was talking about this state as well, the state of complete mindfulness, and it's called in the Mandukya Upanishad, I think it's called being Turiya or something.
You are right. It is Turiya, and then it is beyond Turiya is Turiya Tita. You know, Turiya Tita is beyond Turiya as well. You're absolutely right. Mandukya Upanishad has a very good section on this. There are other Upanishads also. Yes, go on.
So although I didn't understand it completely, there's one thing that he said to me which really hit my imagination, because I have not explored everything. So the small things I had explored, that I could really relate to it. And he said that when you're trying to experience that, what is Turiya? He mentioned 3 states, and he said that in all of those 3 states, Turiya is going to be present. So if you want to experience, yourself, then you can't. Of course, you will be like a person who is looking from the outside, and that gives an immense pleasure to you. But you cannot always go against what you're feeling in the moment, because that in itself is the manifestation of the energy. So I really like that. That helped me understand acceptance more.
One thing I would say, these are all intellectual inquiries. Would you be able to sit in quietude and experience that state? That would bring all the answers. All questions would drop, because the knower itself will dissolve. All this is the knower trying to know what is the unknown. You know, the unknown dimension cannot be brought into the domain of the known through language and logic. It can be brought into the known through that other dimension, which is a mystical. Okay. And all these mystics were brilliant people. They were not idiots. They were not escapists. They look at Tukaram, for instance. Okay. So please, you can continue this discussion with me outside this webinar as well if you are interested. Okay. Thanks for your wonderful interception. Anyone else?
May I? Is it okay?
Sure, why not?
Anjali, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it brought back memories of how much I had enjoyed Swamp Angel when I had read it for my PhD. And yes, at that stage, it seemed something which I was drawn to, but I don't think at that stage I understood as many dimensions as you brought out today, but it remained my favorite. There's, however, one question, a quick question that I have, that you spoke, and this is not to challenge you at all, this is only to ask you for your take on it, that you spoke of interior monologues and soliloquies as reflective of mindfulness, but isn't it often also reflective of mere mind chatter? Because if you take an example of Shakespeare's Othello, where every time we have a Shakespeare soliloquy, Iago's soliloquy, for instance, Iago is actually telling us his schemes and all that is going on in his mind. There isn't what you call Tole's distance to be able to be mindful. So quickly your take on it.
I already answered your question earlier when I said that all mind chatter is only one form of very crude form of mindfulness. That is the first step, the baby step, where you at least have distanced yourself and are aware of what's happening within you. If you hold your hand very close to your eye, for example, you can't see the hand. Unless it is at some distance from it, you cannot see your own hand, okay? So unless you are at some distance from what has happened to you, you cannot watch even that much. And I forgot to say that in that story about I am the bird, that whole quotation ends with the phrase, she was unaware. The sister is not able to reach out to her. Whereas when she steps out and meets her friend Miriam, love flowed from Miriam without thought, touch, or speech. This is what she has said. So that this is the non-verbal dimension on which communion happens. It is not through language.
No, that's perfectly fine. The only question I had was about the interior monologues and soliloquies.
Yes, they are, as I'm saying, to me, I feel they are one step towards mindfulness, because without distancing, you cannot reflect. You can't be self-reflective.
Thank you.
But then you have to go beyond that to that other dimension, which is without logic and without thought. And it is highly meaningful. It leads to the feeling of abundance, adequacy. That's why the prayer Purnamada Purnamidam, where we keep saying we are complete in ourselves. And the holographic model is saying that in science as well. Thank you for that question.
Thank you. Thank you
very much, Dr. Anjali, Dr. Kumi, and all who asked questions and led the discussion.
Ma'am,
yes.
Can I add one quote or like one sentence that I had read in Sri Aurobindo's works? So it's about the soliloquies and the interior monologue, and how we arrive at a realization of sorts. So there was one line which is still like it struck me very hard. It was, there's a difference between reflective realization and authentic realization.
Correct. Very good. That is pure awareness, pure unmixed awareness, where there is no language and no thought, no concept. And that's why Keats was so right. To think is to be full of sorrow.
Sorrow and leaden-eyed despair.
Yes. So absolutely right. I'm so glad you were mindful of that quote. There's another beautiful quote from Aurobindo. Ego was the helper. Ego is the bar. Ego is also, there to help you realize your egolessness. Initially, we are all locked up in the egoic self, the jiva, the self that feels it is inadequate. But self-realization is about transcending that. So If the ego is there, don't condemn it. Self-criticism is also not allowed, you know. We should not judge ourselves either. We accept it, like Maggie accepted her own frailties and flaws, and then she moved on because she went into stillness, and then she was able to drop the poison of, you know, hatred and become free. You know? It is forgiveness that frees us more than the other person, as all scriptures say. Thanks. Yeah. Any other question?
I need to ask one question, Dr. Anjali
Yes.
Bhelande. I just wanted to ask whether we can, like we have Shanta Ras, the Ras theory, the Ras
Yes.
of Shanta Ras,
Very
can
good.
we
Very good.
link it to this board of silence? When you go into Shanta Ras, are you able to transcend your own self?
Yes, very true. There is the Rasa theory, which is also presented by Bharata Muni, who was a mystic mind. I'm so glad you brought this up, because it is talking about 8 rasas from Bharata's Natya Shastra, which is not just about drama, but all art forms. And it is saying that the artist depicts 8 rasas, and they are listed. You can Google and see. But the absence of all 8 rasas is the last one, which was added later on, which is the Shanta rasa. Shanti is peace, as you know, which is again absolute stillness. And Abhinava Gupta has commented upon the rasa theory. And I would urge all of you to take these kind of critical tools and apply them to literary texts, even if they belong to another culture. Okay, thanks for that observation. Yes, anyone else?
Thank you.
This has been so beautiful. So many perceptive observations and questions. Really lovely. Thank you. Yes, I think we are going into stillness, and maybe we are ready to receive Kamala Gopalan's presentation on the scriptures, then Indian scriptures. Are we ready, or are there any more questions? I'm so glad all the questions have ended, because now there'll be stillness. Yes, Rashmi, Pearl?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Anjali. Thank you for all who led the discussion.